Great. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion of the book on Stalinism in Kazakhstan. I will be moderating the discussion today, and I would like first to introduce our brilliant presenters. So we have Mikhail Akulov, who is a professor at Nazarbayev University in Astana. He's a professor of history who specializes in the history of national movements, in the Ukrainian history and history of the Soviet Union in general. Then we have Alexandra Tsay, who is an independent researcher and who studies the memories or the collective memories of the ethnic Korean community in Kazakhstan. And finally, we have Assel Kadyrkhanova, who is a professor at the KIMEP University in Kazakhstan and who studies trauma in contemporary Kazakhstani art. So I think I will first ask the presenters a few questions, but I expect the majority of questions to come from the audience. We should have at least 20 minutes, hopefully more than that, for the questions from the audience. And I would like to invite everyone to ask their questions in the chat. Okay, and then I can read the questions and our presenters can respond to those questions. Okay, if that's all clear, I guess my first question will be to Mikhail. So Mikhail's article, Mikhail's chapter in the book, which was published both in Russian and in English, by the way.
In Kazakh. In Kazakh too.
And in Kazakh as well. Okay, congratulations. I did not actually know that it was published in Kazakh. So the book is very important because it's sort of the first collection of its kind. It sort of combines thematically different chapters. Mikhail's chapter is more of a theoretical chapter, whereas there is a section in the book that also contains the memories and stories that were written by writers who either interviewed the survivors of the forced deportations and then who interviewed the survivors. So, but my first question will be to Mikhail. In his chapter, Mikhail compares Stalinism and Nazism, which I think for Russian speakers is an unfamiliar perspective, right? So I think it's a great chapter, and everyone should read it. So Mikhail, you talk a lot in your chapter. You talk a lot about utopias, and you argue that both Nazism and Soviet totalitarianism or Stalinism as a system, they were utopian in their thinking and in their goals. So my question to you would be, what do you think the relationship is between utopia and trauma? Because the rest of the book focuses heavily on trauma. Whereas you talk about utopia, and it's kind of interesting because utopia and trauma seem to be so opposed to each other, but at the same time, both trauma and utopia have been the dimensions of Soviet experience. So how do you, how the two relate to each other? What's the relationship between those?
What makes the Soviet Union, right, still so appealing to the Soviet experience, so appealing to us, which to say, what makes many of us victims, let's say, or hostages of particular narrative, right, of particular narratives, is I think the aspiration, right? Is I think the aspiration on the part, of the Soviet state builders, well, to create the kind of regime that was never there before, right? Well, exactly, utopia, right? A place beyond history, and I think the experience of not, having thought, not having lived intellectually to the end logically, the consequences of that, experiment or that of that undertaking what is fueling. I mean, even now, what is fueling all the resurgent, revanchism that we see. And this revanchism is one of the expressions of trauma. So perhaps in the most concrete sense.
Thank you very much for the answer, Mikhail. So it seems that your findings continue to have relevance even today, right? Especially now,
yes.
Now that we're witnessing a resurgence of a certain type of nostalgia for the Soviet project. So, okay, thank you very much, Mikhail. My next questions, I guess, will be to both Assel and Alexandra, because both of the chapters look at traumatic memories. My question would be, is it possible to talk about the traumatic memories of the collectivization, famine, or forced deportations of ethnic Korean to Kazakhstan when they have been erased from the collective conscious? So I've noticed that in your chapters, you sort of mention how oftentimes this traumatic memories have been erased. So if the traumatic collective memories have been erased, then how does trauma is passed on to the next generation? Does it simply disappear?
So first, I think I do talk about erased memories in my chapter. First of all, this chapter was written quite long ago, and it was written in 2018. So throughout the time, maybe my views have changed a bit. But yeah, when I speak about erased memories, perhaps I mean more like the erased traces or erased or maybe silenced or censored testimonies, yeah, because when we talk about traumatic memory as it is, it's a paradoxical phrase because there is no such thing as traumatic memory. And it is because in the individual consciousness, trauma is something that does not become a memory. So when we speak about traumatic memory, trauma for an individual person, if it happens, it's an experience of such extremity, yeah, that it makes it impossible to form a memory of an event, but it still does not equal forgetting. It's not that a memory was there and then it was kind of erased, that the person forgot it. It wasn't there in the first place. This was my research. This is what my research was about in part, because I was trying to find ways by the means of art to find forums, yeah, for this not yet memory maybe, or something like an in-memory, we can say. But when we speak about such thing as collective memory, of course, it's different from individual. In collective memory, we can say that, or cultural memory, yeah. In cultural memory, we can say that certain things get silenced, that certain things just don't get there because there is official narrative that does not allow these stories, these personal, maybe like fragments of personal experiences, yet to get into there. And about the collectivization famine, my research in particular, I made, yeah, it was a research through art. So I made a film on Asharshalik, on memory of Asharshalik, where I work with all these different fragments of all different kind of traces, yeah, and of this event, trying to maybe find a form, find an image for the memory that is not there, and it can be maybe an attempt to give shape to a cultural memory that is not there. Because memory of the famine, we can say it's not really there. It's not that we all knew how to remember the famine and then it was kind of just erased by the Soviet like authorities or whatever. It's just that this memory was not given a chance to take shape. So yeah, this is what I wanted to comment, and I hope I answered your question. I wonder if Ida wants to maybe add to that.
Yeah,
Sure.
maybe I can add that there is a political repression, right? The event of political violence, and then the silence that goes after the repression and the silencing of memories or silencing of the public or vernacular narratives. That silence itself is also an act of violence. And I think that our project in general, it addresses maybe that particular act of violence, of an existence of a language to talk or to speak about past event, and an existence of language to remember, and the fact that we don't exactly know how to remember, and what kind of narratives we can now create, or what kind of narratives we now can have apart or beyond the official narrative. Because there was a time then the official narrative was the dominant one, and that people didn't have a chance or were not allowed to dig into or to rework through their own personal memories, or to create the public or vernacular memory. And I think that like the book project and the project itself, like it was a certain attempt to ask those questions, what kind of memories are beyond the official narrative, you know, what kind of collective memory can exist instead of, or parallel to maybe collective official memory that can be instrumentalized to a high extent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. So my next question then would be, you have just sort of mentioned the official narrative, or the sort of the official practices, the official politics of memory, or the official practices of commemoration. So my question then would be, how the official politics of memory in post-Soviet independent Kazakhstan, how is it different from the the collective memories of the community, the collective memories of the famine or the forced deportations?
So I mean, there are several. I think there are several fundamentals that we need to recognize. To some extent, much of the official commemoration, and I think it's a good term to use, or just commemoration practices, right, to distinguish it from memory. Much of it is outsourced in a way, right? It is outsourced to Russia. So much of the remembering or much of the commemoration is taking place elsewhere. And I think one could find an explanation for the readiness to outsource it to Russia, in parts because Stalinism as a whole, could not be easily adopted to the nation building processes. In other words, you could only cherry pick. You could actually take certain aspects of Stalinism, let's say famine, and see how famine could play a particular role. But when you see it as a whole, it becomes difficult, right? And the kind of Russian imperial context or the post-imperial context lend itself, I think, more easily to situating Stalinism in one way or another within the Russian nation building processes. And so I think one of the results of this process of outsourcing much of the much of the process of commemorating, but also on one hand, but on the other hand, of the actual need to deal with this, is this kind of is a very peculiar discourse with which I think many of us are familiar, a kind of discourse that could be described as a as a schizophrenic one, wherein of course parts wherein certain aspects of Stalinism are condemned and are described as tragic, but then other aspects, or not so much even other aspects, but other, let's say, the consequences, even the direct consequences of those events, processes, and occurrences that are seen as tragic, where they are, well, if not so much lionized or glorified, but are somehow are justified, or are seen as representing this kind of the silver lining, right? In whatever the silver lining, what's in the dark cloud, I can't remember what's the expression is, right? So some of our speakers, I think, inadvertently repeated those lines where one talked about the deportation on one hand, and then as if moving to an altogether different kind of section in one's own mental textbook, praising the ethnic pluralism that had resulted as a consequence of those deportations, right? And of course, you may have heard other aspects of that kind of schizophrenic understanding, where on one hand one talks about famine, but then on the other hand one speaks of modernization, of industrialization, and of urbanization, right? All in the same vein. So, I mean, that is obviously a manifestation of a shallow engagement, or actually of an unwillingness to engage with the Stalinism at large, right? Of an unwillingness, but of course also of necessity, because Stalinism is there, and the people who lived through it are there, their descendants are there. So in one way or another, one has to make an announcement. One has to make a series of announcements. However incongruous those announcements are taken as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Mikhail. So I guess my question would also be, my other question would be whether the memories of the collectivization famine in Kazakhstan, or again, the forced deportations of different ethnic groups to Kazakhstan, whether they sort of serve as a foundational myth of the Kazakh nation. Is the famine, is a traumatic sort of memory of the famine, does it serve a role of this cohesive element that brings ethnic Kazakhs together, or is it not?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. I'm not sure if it did, or if it does. Maybe it has a potential, to serve as a foundational element for the Kazakh identity. As Mikhail said, I think at the moment the official narrative about these events is a bit, it's too schizophrenic or polyphonic. There are too many things being said about repressions or collectivization, and I'm not really sure. I think it has potential to, but I don't know if I can give a really direct answer.
But Assel, do you mind if I ask you?
Yeah.
But would you like to see the experience and the memory of, would you like to, it's a normative question, but would you consider this to be a positive development, to see the memory and the experience of the famine being turned into the foundational myth in any sense?
It's a bit, well, I don't know. I think we should be very careful with it, with these narratives. Yeah, because I don't want to see any nationalistic, any nationalistic narratives arising from there. Well, I was doing my research on Asharshuluk. I really stayed for a long time with stories of people, with certain memoirs, with really little fragments of their stories. And in the end, it's all about the dynamic of power. Really, it's about powerful and the powerless. And I don't know. So I'm really coming, like, really in my research as an artist, I'm really coming to an understanding of the importance of empathy, of the importance of there is such thing. There is a term by Braha Ettinger as witnessing, being with somebody, not really like which is being with somebody in pain, staying with them, with someone in pain, even if you cannot share their pain to the fullest. And it's quite opposite to seeing collectivization or any kind of events as foundational elements. It's not what I'm for or what I think about, really. I wonder if somebody has any comments on that.
I can relate to that, I think, because I entered the project as a researcher, but also as a curator, right? A person who works with art and artists. And I think they, like art and artists, inspire me a lot on the way how you can engage with memory, and on the way how you can work with memory through art, especially. And one of the big, I don't want to call it advantage, but maybe qualities that we can try to avoid working with memory through art is that particular instrumentalization. And if when we talk about having a memory of some past event or memories of some traumatic event as a foundational myth, I think there is a lot of instrumentalization toward that memory, right? And through art especially, and through art projects maybe, and not only art projects, like public projects, we can try to avoid that instrumentalization and putting the memory narrative into certain nation building narratives, or trying to put the essence of memory, like essence of collective memory, or into construction of collective identity somehow, and maybe try to aim toward cultural memory and to connect with personal stories, to connect with people, and putting that into the center of our working with memories, because talking with people who remember, working with family stories, or working with very personal events, and with families. And I think the art itself as a sphere, as an area maybe, is a very proper, if I can say that, to aim toward cultural memory, to aim toward that escape of instrumentalization of collective experience, and trying to be more nuanced in our understanding, or in our vision of the past, but also of how that past connected to the present.
Okay, thank you very much. I would sort of ask this question because I've studied the uprising of 1916 and the memories of the Central Asian uprising of 1916 in Kyrgyzstan. And what I've noticed lately is that there have been a rise in the practice, in the sort of the commemoration of the uprising and its victims at the grassroots local level. So local village, local village communities have been paying for example, for the construction of monuments to the victims of the uprising. It has not been the state initiative. It has been, again, a grassroots initiative. And there is now a number of this unofficial monuments to the victims of the uprising of 1916 across Kyrgyzstan, right? So the uprising of 1916 and the memories of the uprising of 1916 is sort of becoming a part of nation building, which is not necessarily state supported. It's something that happens sort of on its own. So I was wondering if the same could be said about Kazakhstan. Are there any sort of, again, unofficial practices of commemoration or maybe monuments to the victims of the collectivization famine or to the victims of the forced deportations that have been, an initiative of local communities?
To be honest, I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm sure my colleagues do. I'm a little hard pressed to be, but at the same time, of course, you have to take into account how different Kyrgyzstan is. Kyrgyzstan is from Kazakhstan, and how different how different, so to speak, power circulates, and how power, of course, is localized. I guess in Kyrgyzstan, how powerful NGOs are in Kyrgyzstan, and how meek they are here. And I think, again, part of the problem to which Assel was adverting, that actually stemmed also from your question, namely using the famine, for example, as a foundational myth, stems from the fact that from the fear that unless the state sponsors it, unless the state gives the money, right, there will be very little interest for it. Right, that is to say, there is a temptation, an obvious temptation on the part of the scholars. You see this all the time, to well, again, to serve present political needs. And I think, again, it has to do more. It has to do more with with the way grants are working here, right? With the connections that exist between academia here and the state, right? With the role that NGOs play or actually do not play in the academic discourse here. We were lucky that our book, was sponsored by Soros, but I think this is more of an exception in the rule.
Maybe I can say about the ethnic communities, and there are ethnic association in Kazakhstan, like Koreans, Rowmans, Poles, and they all of them have their own public institutions or association of ethnic representatives, and they are like quasi, they are connected to official institutions. They are connected to Assembly Народов Kazakhstana, Assembly of Kazakhstani peoples of Kazakhstan, but at the same time they act as representatives of communities, and they have their own practices of gatherings and practices of commemoration. For Koreans, I can say that they have a monument, like a monument where the first Koreans were deported and where they spent the first winter, and there are certain rituals, like public rituals around those monuments and around the way how people commemorate and how they remember. But I don't think that those community practices, or kind of I'm not sure if I can even call them grassroots, but those communities practices had like influenced a lot official narrative about collective memories of like collective memories of deportations, of like ethnic deportations. There is a certain very solid official narrative about ethnic deportation, which wasn't challenged, and which is, I think we mentioned it earlier, that there were ethnic deportation, and that's how Kazakhstani happened to be very multicultural and diverse and multi-ethnic nation, and that's a positive thing, and that's actually quite well packed and very solid as a narrative, and it stayed as an official narrative for many years. And I don't think that any community practices can contribute or can influence to that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we're receiving questions from the audience, so I should probably stop asking you questions and I should instead read the questions from the audience. So the first question is from Tahmina, and she's asking, and she's saying, you talked about silence in the memory when people did not have a chance to express a traumatic experience and were silenced by an official overarching narrative. I am wondering, how does it impact the healing process, individual, family, collective? What are the long-term consequences of silence in the memory? Did the families you worked with talk about it? I would appreciate your thoughts about it. Thank you.
I think I can begin to answer. Silence memories, definitely. When we cannot really talk about healing when it comes to trauma, because trauma is not really healed with time. It's not like a physical injury. But what helps the process, we can say the process of mourning, maybe, the process of maybe coming to some understanding what was it that happened. Then, of course, silencing is extremely traumatizing. And there was there is a text by Dori Laub about how about witnessing, basically, about how a person who listens to the survivor, the former victim of an abuse, how he becomes like a secondary witness, and how in this process of witnessing, actually, the survivor begins to realize what had happened to him, because before that, they are not given this chance. Their like sense of identity, everything is shattered. And yeah, of course, if people are not given this chance, if they are not even listened to, or even they have to keep silent. They have to they like, you know, that in our countries so torn by these experiences of all these different policies, mass deportations, gulags, people who were released from gulags, they could not talk about their time in prison, maybe because they didn't want to, maybe because they didn't want to take this experience to their families, but also because they signed some, I don't know, paper, or they were afraid. And so they were never given this chance to properly not heal, but even kind of maybe comprehend this entire experience, what happened to them, why they feel this the way they feel. And you asked that how it affects the later generations, yeah?
Yes, I think the question is about the long-term consequences and how the families that you worked with talked about it.
I didn't really work with families. I would like to maybe in the future to maybe reach to the families of people. I think there would be many. In a way, when I tried to do this project, when I went for my artist residency in the States, I kind of asked if people could come and share their their family members with me, and they came and they said that, well, some people came and they said that they don't know anything. They actually wanted to learn a bit from me about what happened. They said, of course, our parents lived through this or that event, but they never talked about it. So there is definitely like this silence, the gap, the trauma. And yeah, and my thought would be that it's of course it still affects the family. It's that the event, the experience doesn't go anywhere. And for that, maybe I've been reading Svetlana Alexievich and her collection of stories, and I think it begins to give a kind of an impression of how this entire experience of Gulag, of Soviets, the entire Soviet project, the utopian project in a way, how it affected everybody, how it affected the country, why we are so, I don't know why we still cannot come to terms with what kind of legacy we inherit. So yeah, sorry, I think somebody can maybe add more to that.
Okay, if there are no other answers, I think we can move on to the next question. Uyanga, you have a question. Could you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
Hi, hello. Hi, my name is Uyanga, and I was very I did a research on mothers' medals. I don't know if I think you also have it in Kazakhstan. So while doing that, I actually took on a temporal view of how mothers relate to the medal. So it's a psychosocial study. So what I found very interesting through my studies were the mothers who lived. We had also a purge period in Mongolia where the Soviets came and killed many of us and destroyed a lot of sort of the cultural monuments, all the temples. So it was a pure genocide too. So mothers who actually lived during those period had a very interesting way of saying, I don't know. They would express, so questions would be usually answered with, I don't know, like, I don't think I can do that. So sort of like a very dismissive one. So I thought in the beginning it might be age related or just, they don't know me, but it's very specific to that generation. So this is a way of being silenced. Actually, it's became such a banal way of saying, I don't know, but it's a very conventionalized way of expressing the past traumas and collective memories. So when I elaborated on the questions, they would answer precisely the dates. Actually, they would say, I remember it was 1957. So they do know it. So, but it, like I did a qualitative analysis, did a code writing on the words they say, and it's interesting how much they say, I don't know, but they do know it in precise detail. And they're this way of illuminating this past collective communicative memory with this, how do you say it? We're saying the cultural memory, right? So this all comes out actually as a scaffold of social representations of the past. And you could observe how they actually relate to the current nation state, which they don't feel, as sort of as their kinship sort of, or their group. They don't see it as their intersubjective group. And as I said, my research was a temporal one. So I also did the same questionnaires with the generations in democracy times. And what was interesting was actually they do carry that collective grief, but they don't know how they relate to it. And but they sort of express this sort of collective grief in a very dialogical way. So I thought it's very interesting. And I found also this very similar studies on Silencing and Remembering, also in another Mongolian anthropologist's book, which actually was also a sort of way to scaffold my information on. And I thought maybe it would be interesting to sort of do a cross-country sort of study on silencing and remembering. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Yanga. The next question is from Erica. She's asking, who do you think in Central Asia still perpetrates the narratives of modernization under the Soviets as a good thing, and why? Thank you. Okay, so I think has already been mentioned in the discussion how a lot of the narratives that we have, official narratives that we have today about, you know, the sort of for example, the multicultural, the multicultural diversity of Kazakhstan being sort of the positive, in a way, outcome of something that has been otherwise very bad, the forced, I think, deportations. Right, so this is a part of the national narrative. Another part of the national, the official narrative, of course, is that the Soviet Union, despite all of its the atrocities it's committed, has also been largely good for the Central Asian societies because it developed them. Right, it invested into the education, economic development, industrialization, modernization, and so on. So, who do you think still sort of perpetrates this view that this, you know, Central Asia benefited from Soviet modernization, and why do you think?
You mean you want names, names and addresses? What?
Well, I think it's Erica's question,
yes.
but
So not names, but larger forces. Where is it coming
Larger
from?
forces.
Maybe outside of Central.
Well, it certainly comes from academia, absolutely. I mean, still does, both from Western academia, from Russian academia, from historians here as well. I mean, you could look at Dina Manjolov's. It's a good book, actually. Latest book on the Soviet project and the establishment of the elites. Well, it's certainly kind of written partially with the kind of, there are all those laudatory undertones. But again, I'm not necessarily, I do find your work a pretty solid one. So it's a good example of that kind of work. Absolutely. Our historians who are engaged, well, you know, there's actually one way where there's actually another narrative which I think should be mentioned, and I think it is also equally dangerous. And again, you know, as a historian, I'm not in favor of. I don't find this particularly useful method particularly useful to be labeling, to be using normative judgments often, right? Let's say, if one has to, one should do it extremely sparingly, right? Extremely sparingly. But I think one way, there's one particular way that is certainly not conducive to us coming to grips to what had taken place, is by dissociating, well, Kazakhstan entirely from this.
Okay, I can't really see Mikhail.
Yeah, I think
the connection has dropped.
I think he's frozen.
Okay, Mikhail, are you there? We've lost you. Mikhail?
I am there. Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
See, the moment I mentioned the name and the address, the connection went down. You know, совпадение. Anyways, So, all right, I'm not going to mention the names, but again, there is a tendency in part of certain historians to see the Soviet experience as illegitimate, right? As not a legitimate part of what's of our past. Again, this is not only common to us. This is also, you know, what you see, what's you know, a number of Ukrainian historians are doing, and this is not a conducive way, right? Simply by you know, blocking it off, right? Closing your eyes, not seeing this. You're not dealing with the problem itself. You're not dealing with the problem itself. You know. There is a historian, a well-known historian, who often keeps on saying that the only intelligentsia the only modern, so to speak, secular intelligentsia that the Kazakhs had possessed came from Alash. So whoever is not from Alash, or whoever had been sanctioned by the Soviets is a pseudo-intelligent, or as a collaborator. Not a particularly useful way. All the more so that actually that it sort of fits into the present aggressive, dangerous Russian discourse, whereby the Soviet past is entirely claimed by Russia, is entirely seen as yet another manifestation, as Putin put it in his last speech, that Soviet Union is but a particular historical, you know, manifestation of Russia's historical development, right? The other side of the coin is us national historians here excluding Soviet experience entirely from discussion as legitimate, as not meriting us dwelling upon it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? I actually had a question to Assel and Alexandra. Has it been difficult to interview people and to, you know, have they been keen to share the memory, their own memories, or, you know, the memories that were passed on to them by their parents or grandparents? Or
like for
go on, sorry.
For my chapter, I've met some Korean families, and it was a bit difficult maybe to talk and to ask and to come to the point where people are eager to share, and because and you can feel that from the beginning that there is a certain way how they used to tell the story, and but you want more, right? And you keep asking questions and maybe some indirect questions to see if there are like more responses. And interesting way there was like men and women and the way how they share and what details they remember. And I think I was trying to see the difference maybe in the way they remember and in the way they actually were telling the stories, to see something that they can talk through. But it's also a bit timely story, the deportation. So you talk to the first generation, but also you talk to the second generation. And then I was working also with artists, and I was meeting some artists and some writers who were also like in second or third generation and trying like the different approach, reworking memories and connecting through their personal experience, but also through the stories they heard. So it's a not that difficult maybe to meet and to talk, but it's the question I had was is there a way they can share story differently, or was there a certain narrative that existed for some time, and was there a certain way how they share the stories? And if I can try, if I can find something that maybe beyond the regular way or the way how they remember. And because I was eager to find something outside the official narrative that I was very familiar with. Yeah, so it's not difficult to connect, and and I think people are, especially now, they're open to share, but to some extent you always have a question, is there something else that was silenced, and if I can find a way or an approach to that silenced part and to that forgotten part, and how I can find that way, you know, and if there are no way you can access something that was erased, what can be there in that particular place of erased memory, and that may be something that art can do.
Okay, thank you. And did you find something hidden, something silenced?
I think what maybe the main, not the main, one of the findings was that it's still the whole experience of authorities. I'm not talking about deportation in particular, but the experience of repression is not yet in a public sphere to the extent that we know how to talk about it, you know, and especially if you want to access something that wasn't erased or that was hidden, and we don't know how to access it, and we don't know how to talk about it, and we actually don't know what that thing is, what we're looking for. And that's the whole equation is interesting itself. We have the silence, right? We did not have rituals to commemorate and to remember and to talk about repressions, or to talk about difficult, like traumatic past. And that what we can do now, actually try to find the way to something that was hidden. I cannot like give you direct answer. I cannot say that I found something that, you know, that was silenced, and now we know how that trauma like speaks now. But the answer I received myself is that that's a way how we can work now, how we like trying to find that language to talk about difficult part, and the difficulties we have in, you know, in accessing the past, in in accessing our memories. Those difficult itself is maybe the work that should be done, you know.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. Assel, did you want to add something before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think Ala kind of, I absolutely agree with Ala on maybe it is not really difficult to reach to people and ask them for their stories, but sometimes these stories are a bit too, they're kind of polished already, yeah. And I also wanted to add about temporal distance. So in particular, when we speak about the famine, for example, it happened quite a long time ago, I think already like 90 years ago. So to find witnesses or survivors of the famine is, I think, is impossible, unless they're very, very old. And even then they would be really like child survivors, yeah. So the types of memories, types of stories that we deal with is always family stories. So it is somebody that their children, grandchildren, or like even later generations tell about how their parents or grandparents survived. And it's the quality of these memories are a bit different still. There would be like a distancing, there would be mythologizing maybe. So yeah, this is what I wanted to add to that.